Welcome, my name is Christopher Paisley, a Philadelphia public school teacher for Inside White Fragility. Today is episode 6 in the Debunking DiAngelo series, and the topic is Racial Progress Has Not Come from Identity Politics. So anybody who's read the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo knows that in her author's note, she dedicates this entire segment, this passage, to explaining how the book is rooted in identity politics, and she makes no, secret about that. So let me just go into her book and read what she says in her author's note. All right, specifically, and I quote, "The term identity politics refers to the focus on the barriers specific groups face in their struggle for equality. We have yet to achieve our founding principle in America, but any gains we have made thus far have come through identity politics." And then she goes on to state, "All progress we have made in the realm of civil rights has been accomplished through identity politics." So she directly defines identity politics, which I'm going to kind of go into, is not an accurate definition. It's only a fragment of what it is. And the second thing is she's directly tying the American civil rights movement to identity politics, which is not correct. It's disingenuous. Again, it's taken out of context. Her statement that identity politics refers to the focus on the barriers specific groups face in their struggle for equality is disingenuous because it's only half the equation. While identity politics does aim to remove barriers to marginalized groups, it also uses identity itself, race, religion, gender, and sexuality, as a source of power. In other words, it places membership in a social group over the character of the individual, thus turning Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream directly on its head. That's the interesting thing about this reinvention of civil rights by anti-racists and people who forward identity politics like DiAngelo. Whenever someone wants to talk about Martin Luther King's dream of how he wanted his children not to be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, immediately anti-racists and folks like DiAngelo rush in and they say, "You're taking Martin Luther King out of context. That's not what he meant," and all these other things. And there's this struggle to try and redefine and control what he is saying. But actually what Martin Luther King was saying, if you look at the speech itself and you go through it, it is true. He is saying, don't judge a person by the color of their skin, judge a person by the content of their character. He does say that. There's no misunderstanding there. And what happens with identity politics is it's using race, religion, gender, sexuality, basically a person's cover or the color of their skin, as a means to control power, to make decisions, to make judgments, to operate in society, not the content of character. Okay, it's not that. And there's been all this, like I said, there's been all of this kind of jockeying for a position to redefine or reinterpret what Martin Luther King was saying. But let's get right to the point. He was saying we're going to judge people by the content of their character, which means the individual's principles, the individual's characters. And he did believe that there were universal qualities, universal human qualities between all races, qualities that transcended race, religion, gender, and sexuality that we can use to communicate, that we can use to get rid of racism, that we can use for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, so that's what was going on there, and we need to look at that in an honest way. So what I want to do today is I want to go to an article, once again from the website New Discourses, which I mentioned in a previous podcast. The title of the article is "Identity Politics Does Not Continue the Work of the Civil Rights Movement, as DiAngelo Claims." So what this article does is, and it does it well because it's kind of articulating points that I've been thinking about, and I'm sure many people have. It breaks down the civil rights movement and the fight for equality and justice and inclusion into two kind of camps. The first thing is what is known as universal liberalism. It's what Pluckrose and Lindsay called universal liberalism. And this is the classic liberalism that's not just a political viewpoint on the political spectrum. People hear liberal and they think it's left of center. But when they speak of universal liberalism, what they're talking about is this classic notion of freedom, individuality, equal opportunity, kind of the liberalism that America was founded on by the founding fathers. Again, conservatives, liberals, and libertarians all employ some forms of this universal liberalism. Universal liberalism seeks diversity, equity, and inclusion through individuals seeking a shared humanity at a personal level, practicing the kinds of core principles and values that transcend race and other identities. Things like friendship, love, respect, and tolerance for diversity are the core building blocks that unite us and provide equal access to rights, freedoms, and opportunities. So if you think systems are made of people, and if every person had these good core values of, tolerance for diversity, love, respect, communication, if everybody had these things, then the systems wouldn't be corrupted, then the systems wouldn't be out of control and imbalanced. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is identity politics, which Robin DiAngelo claims is at the core of the civil rights movement, and what she claims is at the heart of all the progress that has ever been achieved in America. So, identity politics, on the other hand, are rooted in social constructivism. Okay, this is an interesting concept. It's the idea that truth and knowledge are constructed by hierarchies of power within society. So there is no real absolute truth. There is no real absolute knowledge. For example, love, friendship, tolerance, science, objectivity. People who believe in identity politics, they believe that this stuff is not universal. Now, I totally and completely disagree. And one of the reasons why this is not helpful is because you're never going to find a place where you can come together and unite and have a common bond. So I don't believe that white love is different than black love. You know what I mean? Or white friendship is different from black friendship. Or that white tolerance is different from black tolerance. Or honesty. Or respect. Or communication. These values are universal. They do exist at the most fundamental levels across cultures and religions and ethnicities and genders and sexualities. And if you break this down and you say, when you look at social constructivists and the people who are postmodern, the people who believe in identity politics, they're going to sit there and tell you that, this stuff is different. A white person's concept of love is different, or a black person's concept of time, and all these things. And when you really look at what they're saying, that is the most racist thing you could really want to say. Because what it does is it's keeping people separate, and it's not allowing a system of communication to come together. So if we have totally different experiences, like, an African American or a person of color experience is totally different from a white person. We're talking totally different. So they cannot communicate. If your white knowledge and black knowledge are different, or white rules and black rules are different, how are we ever going to communicate? How are we ever going to empathize? How are we ever going to come together and get past all of these things? So what identity politics do is they hold these identity groups in opposition to each other. It is a zero sum. They're dividing people in these identity groups. The oppressors and the oppressed, the haves and the have-nots. The white privilege and the people of color who are disadvantaged or targeted. It's definitely dualistic. So identity politics is saying there is no universal understanding, so we must look at race, religion, gender, and sexuality. So in a way, it is discriminating according to these things. All right, it's not looking at the individual, it's looking at the social identity and group. It literally is taking the civil rights movement and what Martin Luther King tried to do, and it's flipping it on its head, and it's telling us with a straight face that it's not doing that. It's amazing. So, despite disingenuous claims from DiAngelo, the civil rights movement did not employ the use of identity politics. Instead, it used the values of universal human rights and the inherent worth of every individual, and did so regardless of race, religion, gender, or sexuality. If we truly care about diversity, equity, and inclusion in America, we must resist using polarizing identity politics and instead choose an approach based on universal human values.